politics now.
Oh, yeah, this bright spot's there, Carol.
Just
yeah,
into
that's the bright
Washington.
spot.
We can't watch Wall Street. Let's go to Washington.
We have to talk about this. It is now up to House Minority Leader Nancy Pelosi to fill the final 3 seats of the new 12-member congressional supercommittee. She has until Tuesday to do it.
Yeah, she seems to be dragging her feet a little on this. I guess she wants to make a solid decision. House Speaker John Boehner and Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell have already made their selections. 3 Democrats were picked a day earlier by Senate Majority Leader Harry Reid.
Joe Johns joins us live from Washington this morning. And, you know, Joe, first of all, any word on who Pelosi might be considering? And secondly, isn't this just a shrunk down? How do you make sure it's not just a shrunken version of dysfunctional Congress?
I don't think you can do that. Wait. Look, Pelosi has actually been quoted as saying she doesn't intend to draw lines in the sand with her picks, but that was before the other super committee members were named. She's still keeping people guessing, no clue on who she's thinking about. And, you know, the political pressures on Nancy Pelosi inside the Congress are a little different than some of the other leaders. There's a bit of a buzz going around Capitol Hill pointing out underrepresentation of women and minorities on the super committee. So far right now, there's 1 woman, no minority member. But the biggest question really is who among Democrats in the House would actually want this job going into an election year, because it creates real headaches for people, say liberal Democrats, people who want to hold the line against entitlement cuts, and a lot of people saying it needs to be on the table. Pelosi's office tells us they do have plenty of people who want the job, and like you said, she has until Tuesday. As far as compromise goes, you know, a handful of deal makers, we know all that, and is this going to be just another representation of the dysfunctional Congress? So far, it has been just a little bit of everything, and, you know, it's kind of stacked against them, but as we've said earlier on this program today, there are reasons why, including those so-called triggers, that are incentives for them to get a deal. So we'll see.
All right, Joe Johns. Thanks, Joe. I mean, you heard that there. Can they compromise? It's a $1.5 trillion question. That's if you just count the spending. It could be a bigger question if you count what the stock market does if we don't get our act together, well, because people are losing an awful lot of money.
Important thing to think about, Christine.
It's nerve-wracking.
We all think about what we're not losing or gaining with cuts and taxes, but for those people who are invested, the losses of the last few weeks probably eclipse those.
Ironically,
you know,
the losses for the people who make $200,000 or more are much greater because they're more invested in the market.
As Carol likes to point out, a lot of regular folk are not all that heavily invested in the market. The wealthier in the country tend to be more invested.
So their taxes aren't going up, but they're getting killed on Wall Street.
But the top 3% can also afford to lose more than the rest of us, right?
Well, that's
I mean, if
our next guest might take issue with that. Let's talk to him about it. The Republican Senator Pat Toomey of Pennsylvania is one of the Republicans, one of the senators who will be sitting on the super committee. He joins us live from Philadelphia. Senator Toomey, good to see you again. Thank you for being on the show with us.
Good morning. Thanks for having me.
Senator, you come by your disdain for increased taxes very honestly. You've been doing this for years.
Yeah.
You're not pandering to a particular constituency on it, which on one level pleases us because that means that you're going to come by it honestly. But we need compromise on here. Are you possibly a guy to compromise on something that might require tax increases? I mean, could you ever bring yourself to do that? And I mean that in the best way.
Yeah, I understand. Listen, I think, first of all, there should be 2 big guiding principles. I hope for all of us, certainly for me. And one is that we've absolutely got to do something meaningful in reducing our deficits. But the other is, whatever we do has to be pro-growth. It has to be constructive for the economy. It has to help to create an environment for greater economic growth, because we badly need the job creation that only comes with economic growth. A big, broad tax increase is not good for growth. Now, are there ways that we can reform the tax code? Absolutely. Are there inefficiencies? Is it outrageous when a huge American corporation doesn't pay any income taxes? Yes, it is. So I think there are a lot of opportunities to compromise without having some kind of economically crushing tax increase.
But, Senator, this committee doesn't have much time to completely reform the tax code and the loopholes for corporations and the like. You're going to have to decide in short order how to come up with $1.5 trillion. Would you agree to tax increases of some sort in that plan, in that package, if you are assured later on tax reform is something this Congress is going to start to handle?
Look, I think we need to deal with the tax reform that we can in this package. Now, it's going to be difficult. You're right. We're under a compressed time frame. I think it's likely that what we're going to do as a committee is look at other ideas that have already been floated, ideas that have been vetted, ideas that are thoughtful and constructive and have some broad political support, rather than reinventing wheels in a short period of time. I think we're going to look to some good work that's been done. And there's been some very good bipartisan work on tax reform as well as entitled reform and spending reduction. So there's a lot out there. We've got to pull it together.
Are you referring to the Bowles-Simpson report as something you might turn to?
Look, personally, I would think that we ought to take a look at some of the ideas in Bowles-Simpson, because there were some very constructive ideas. If you look at what their main focus was on the tax side, for instance, it was mostly about getting rid of some of the really egregious deductions and write-offs and loopholes and special interest carve-outs and lowering marginal rates. That's pro-growth if you do that sort of thing. There are other groups out there, the Domenici group.
A lot of people have asked about the mortgage interest deduction. Should that be on the table?
Listen, I'm not going to draw lines in the sand here, and I'm not going to have negotiations on a TV show. With all due respect, I think this is something that the committee needs to address. But my point is simply that some very good and constructive and thoughtful work has been done. There are well-vetted ideas. Part of our responsibility, I think, is to look at these ideas and consider whether they should be part of a final package.
Senator Toomey, with all due respect, back to you. Some of us think that the negotiations on TV might be more successful than the ones in Congress. The question coming up is, how are we going to make sure that the 12 of you are not some mini version of the gridlock that we saw? I don't think anybody wants to see a repeat of what we just went through.
Right. Look, that's a fair question. I've been very critical of the lack of productivity in the Senate. The fact that this Senate has refused to do a budget resolution, I think, is outrageous. Now, one of the things that we have going for us in this committee is a process that requires an up or down vote on our product. That's unprecedented. No other committee has that opportunity. So if we can reach a majority in the committee, the House has to vote on our bill without amendment, without delay. The Senate has to take up our bill, and a simple majority have to vote it up or down. There's no filibuster opportunity. The leadership can't block it. So we have actually a lot of pressure on us to come up with some kind of an agreement that'll be constructive, and Congress has to vote up or down on it. And frankly, if we pass it in both houses of Congress, I think the president will sign it. So I think we'll feel a lot of pressure to get something done.
There's an IRS report. The IRS has released its numbers for 2009 that show just 3% of taxpayers who make more than $200,000 a year, and only 0.2% make more than $1 million a year. And of course, that's the whole idea, that if you raise taxes on the richest part of our society, it would really, it would not affect 97% of people. Do you think that we need to be talking about, or we need to be being honest about how many people are affected by tax increases for wealthy Americans?
Look, we should be honest about every aspect of this debate, but we also should be honest about the fact that raising marginal tax rates is counterproductive to economic growth. It discourages investment and capital formation and risk-taking and job creation. It's a tax that'll land heavily on small businesses. So I think we ought to be honest about all aspects of this discussion. And as I said, I think the guiding ideas ought to be deficit reduction that's pro-growth.
Good point. But Senator, we haven't seen a tax increase in a long time. In fact, we got an extension of the Bush-era tax.
We've been cutting taxes for 10 years.
And we haven't seen the job creation. So where's the evidence that not cutting taxes creates jobs? We haven't seen it.
Well, let's remember that after cutting taxes in 2003, we did have a tremendous job creation. Unemployment rate dropped to below 5%, and as recently as 2007, our federal deficit under the current tax regime was only 1.2% of GDP, a tiny fraction of where it is now. So look, I think there's a lot can be done to improve the tax code, to make it more sensible, to make it more fair, to make it simpler, and lower marginal rates. And if we do that, we'll have stronger growth and more revenue as a result.
How much pressure are you guys feeling?
I think we've got to focus on deficit reduction that's pro-growth.
Sorry to interrupt you. How much pressure are you feeling from Wall Street, from the fact that so many people who've been looking to guidance from Washington are getting killed in their 401ks and IRAs right now, are seeing so much of the gains of the year gone, vanishing?
I'm not feeling any pressure at all from Wall Street. I'm feeling it from Main Street. I'm feeling it from my constituents that I'm meeting with in Pennsylvania every day. They want us to make some progress. They want us to get us ourselves on a sustainable fiscal path. We've got a lot of problems going on. There's a European sovereign debt crisis underway. We've had very weak economic data. I think we're overregulated in many respects. So there's a lot of things that need to be addressed. But an important piece of this is our looming deficits, and people that I talk to in Pennsylvania want us to address that.
Senator Pat Toomey, good to talk to you. Senator Pat Toomey is Republican, and he's a member of the Super Committee. He's going to have a very busy few months.
Can we ask Senator Toomey before he leaves? I mean, do you think, Senator, that that Congress should come back from its recess?
You know, I wouldn't oppose that. You know, there's a lot of things we should have been doing all along, starting with having a budget resolution. The absence of a budget resolution has all kinds of negative consequences. There are things that we should have done a long time ago in expanding, ratifying the trade agreements that would expand export opportunities. I think we should have a moratorium on new regulations so that small businesses can thrive. There's a lot of things we could do on the tax front. We've got a big spending bill that we're going to have to take up. Some of this should have been done before now. I don't know why it's taken as long as it has. And the committee, I can tell you, will be doing work during the month of August, certainly by phone, probably in person. So there'll be a lot that is getting done.
So just to make it clear, I mean, you think that your fellow lawmakers should cut short their recess and come on back to Washington?
If we had a constructive pro-growth agenda that we could pass, I would be in favor of that. Unfortunately, as I said before, we have a majority leader in the Senate that doesn't want to take up a budget, didn't want to do the ordinary appropriation bills. If we're not going to do something constructive, then there's not much point.
All right, Pat Toomey,
Senator,
thanks so much.